from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we will be talking about the issue of black-on-black crime in America today. And this has been a subject that I have been working on for over the last 23 years. And I have a lot of special guests today. So join us on Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison. Welcome back to Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison. And I am just honored today to have two very special guests with me today with this conversation that I have been having now for years. It sometimes gets me in trouble, but it is a conversation that I believe that we have to have in the black community if we're going to help address this issue of what I call urban violence. Some in the past have called it black-on-black violence. And certainly what is so startling to me is that every year in America, black Americans account for about half of the homicides in this nation. And it's just a startling statistic that I'm willing to have the conversation about, and I'm willing to talk about the tough things that I think we have to talk about as black Americans in trying to address this issue. And what really sparked this conversation today is an article I had a chance to read from 1979. And one of our guests, former Deputy Mayor John Hall of Indianapolis, gave me the read. And from Ebony Magazine in 1979 about the whole issue of black-on-black crime. I had never read that article, and in 1979, I was just graduating from high school, getting ready to go to Indiana University in Bloomington when this article came out. And it was based on the 1977 numbers. What's really startled me that more blacks were killed on the streets of America in 1977 than all of the black soldiers that were killed in the entire Vietnam War. That just stunned me. It was really 2 years after my brother was killed on the streets of Louisville, Kentucky in 1975. My brother was shot down in 1975, and I remember the pain that my family went through. It was the first time that this had happened to my family. But I remember very vividly, that whole experience and how it traumatized my family and what its impact was on me. My guests today, as we talk about this, are two individuals that I hold in high regard. The former Indianapolis Police Chief Rick Hite, who is joining us from Baltimore today on the line. And as I said, John Hall, who I first met in 1993. He was the deputy mayor under Mayor Stephen Goldsmith. And also, he happened to be a member of the congregation that I pastored. So I don't know if I want to blame him for a lot of the stuff that I have done over the years for getting me involved in these community, activities. But certainly, when people say I'm a community activist, it probably started with John Hall and another member of the church, Glenn Howard. So welcome, Chief Hite and John.
Good morning.
Thank you, Pastor. Good talking to him. My good friend John Hall also.
Yes.
John, would you talk a little bit about the Ebony, the article back then, some of the highlights, and then me and Chief Hite will just get in and let's have an honest discussion that Chief Hite, we don't always have in the black community about this issue. It's almost sometimes a taboo. But John, tell us a little bit about that article in 1979 in Ebony magazine.
The interesting piece to me, and I'd like to hear Chief Hite's comments. I'm looking forward to that.
Hello?
One of the best chiefs we've had here in the city of Indianapolis.
I can't hear you.
The impact in 1979, when Ebony produced this article and they used 1977 data, black-on-black crime was a crisis. 40 years ago, black-on-black crime was viewed by leaders in the country, black and white, as a crisis. The impact that you can see from this article on black crime on black communities, the cost of robbery, property damage, and theft, the cost to families of losing family members is in the billions. This is 79. Just think if we calculated today the tremendous impact of finance, of the financial loss that you see in core cities around the countries. Higher insurance, higher costs for goods, higher costs for housing. The gamut just goes on and on. And I think that's what this article tried to summarize, in that the breakdown of family structures, drug addiction, behaviors that are not beneficial, that young people are choosing, is wreaking havoc on black communities.
One of the interesting things, and Chief Hite, in and basically the numbers were based on 1977, that the piece that I want to deal with today, because there was 3 sections this article really dealt with. It dealt with the causes, it dealt with the consequences of black-on-black crime, and it dealt with the cures, or what we would call solutions. But Chief Hite, in 1977, there were 8 causes that Ebony magazine, talked about that was leading to black-on-black crime. Number 1 was racism and oppression. Number 2 was unemployment, the high unemployment that impacted certain segments of the black community that led to a lot of the crime and violence. Number 3 was drugs and addicts. Number 4, which was interesting, but I have been saying this for years, was urbanization and family breakdown. Number 5 was the inadequate prison system. Number 6 was the double standard of justice. And then number 7 was media and crime. So those were, in 1979, when this article was written, based on the 1977 numbers, those were the 7 main contributing factors to what was leading to this disproportionate impact on the black community when it came to black-on-black crime, or what we would call today black-on-black violence. What is your assessment of what was going on in the 70s, and what has changed over since the 1970s up until 2022?
Well, I appreciate you asking that. You covered a lot in that decade of the 70s. But I remember in 77 and 78, I was looking to get into law enforcement for the first time. But I also remember looking back over the history and thinking as a child in 1963, how I left school and everyone in my community was in tears because of the recent assassination of a president. And there begins, I think, part of the challenge of the history of whether or not we lost our innocence in 1963. There were those who said that decade from 63 to 73 was one of the toughest we experienced in our community. We lost, of course, the President of the United States. We lost his brother, Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy. We lost a lot happening from 63 just to 1970 and the early 70s. So the question is whether or not any of those impacts or those deaths in now more brought about a change in our community, particularly engaging those who come back as veterans to our community and those who are looking for employment and opportunities beyond the dream of Dr. King. I would suggest that maybe if we look at the history and the impact on those who led the movement at that time, afterwards we saw that it was become disjointed in certain respects, and the birth of the Panther Party and other groups that came about. And the question is whether or not at that particular point was there a clear vision and mission for our community, and what did we collectively see happening in our families? That's an open-ended question. I don't have all the answers, but I think that had a great deal to do with what we saw later on as symptoms of a greater problem.
You know, one of the things that the Ebony article brought out, and particularly the publisher, was that this is a very difficult conversation in the black community, and that there were many who did not want us to have this kind of public conversation about what was happening in the black community when it came to black-on-black crime, and what were some of the root causes of it, because it kind of fit into some of the racist stereotypes about black people. So there were many who argued that we ought not to have this conversation, particularly publicly. And it's similar to what I have heard probably in the last 15 years in Indianapolis, as I have tried to talk about this issue publicly, is that I was betraying the black community, that I was having a conversation and putting the black community down by talking about these issues publicly and fitting into the stereotypes of what white America feels about black people, is that we are already violent and promiscuous and those kind of things. So it's hard, I think, for us to really have a difficult conversation with each other, because some of it is external, and I think Ebony Magazine articulated that, but some is also internal. And what do we do internally to try to address the root causes that is leading to so much violence in our community, when we are 13% of the population, but we are 50% or more of the homicides every year in this nation? There's something wrong with that picture.
Yeah, but again, we can't ignore the origin of some of this and how it impacts. I still believe that we still suffer from post-traumatic stress, both from Vietnam and from the deaths of some of our leaders in the country. I believe that some of our communities were on the right path in terms of what were the challenges in our neighborhoods and our community. But somewhere along the line, I saw it and didn't understand it as a young man, but as I got older, when you have the pathway kind of taken away from you, or not, it's become skewed. We had different voices taking over different organizations and different messages, and the messaging out of the community of success somehow got lost. And what we heard was the turmoil and the problems. So the question becomes, after the movement, did we become more invested in the problem than the solution? Because I think many of us really were during that time. But the question is, do we go back and teach survival skills to the next generation? And have we done that enough to show success does begin in our race? And can we continue to move forward and be, as we would like to say, every generation should do better than the last? So the question is, have we carried on those messages of success enough to where people get it?
Go ahead, John. I know you was giving John it because I was going to ask I know one of the issues they talked about was urbanization, and as blacks kind of migrated from the south to the north, what that impact was, on the black community, pulling, almost, disrupting, when we talk about the family breakdown, breaking down the extended family, within the black community. Where in the South, if someone was having difficult time, hardship when it came financially, the extended family was always there. They also helped raise, John and Charles, when they were kids. So you had a lot more people, raising you and looking out for you, which also helped to keep John and Charles, under control. So add a little bit in there.
Well, I think you and the chief both are hitting the major points. But I've always said it's the tale of two cities.
Okay.
We've got a 40% black middle class, that's a plus 40%, that has overcome racism, avoided drugs, kept a family structure, may not have been a two-family, but some form of a family structure, avoided the prison system, and have moved into a bracket that you could describe as being middle class. What is the difference between that group, that successful group, and then those who are at that underclass that are segregated and isolated in black communities or white communities that are making decisions that doesn't let them progress up the ladder? Is it schools that aren't preparing them? Is it family and parents that aren't giving them discipline and structure, or to understand how to play the game and get skilled up and move forward and work and save? I think that's a blaring picture of what has happened. And is that internal part critical and important? I think if you look at the black middle class and you look at the underclass, I think you got to say that it's critical on decisions and on the isolation and the proximity of bad choices that are going to keep you in that underclass.
So the question becomes, and you and Chief Hite are kind of hitting on it. Okay, if we have this 40% middle class that, and Chief, you can answer this. You probably didn't have as many police officers in the suburbs as you did in the urban core. Why? What was causing that 40%? And I guess I will include myself in that 40%. What caused us to overcome a lot of the barriers that maybe the 60% did not overcome? And my question is the role of the family as we started to see from the 1960s to where we are today, where we have 74% of black children being born in the single-parent household. Did that increase the poverty rate within the black community? And as urbanization occurred and we started moving large numbers of low-income black families into projects, into apartment complexes, into neighborhoods that we consider the poor neighborhoods, was that also a contributing factor to the rise in crime and violence? Chief, you want to take that?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say yes to everything you said.
Okay.
And yes, and you described it perfectly. I think the idea of the migration, even though we have the term is a reverse migration back to the South, but the migration to the South often look like this. I can tell you, friends of mine talked about how they put their money together to get a bus ticket, and one had 12, another had 10, and one ended up in one northern city in near Chicago, and the other one ended up in Detroit, and on the East Coast, right. One ended up in Baltimore, and the other ended up in Philadelphia. It went as far as their money would take them, but they came with a singular purpose and a mission to better themselves and their family because they wanted to live better than the next generation. And then they would often send for family members to come live with them. But it was a core mission that everyone understood that we're about the greater good of the community. And everyone raised their children pretty much in the same type of core values or a system that they understand justice, right and wrong, and the idea was to continue to progress. Now, over the years, that was watered down a bit, I think, and I'm just rushing through this. Our generation of kids, we often said that we don't want them to suffer through the trials and tribulations we've gone through, and in a sense, we did not prepare them for what we would call bad days today. And the question is that now what we're seeing when we talk about kids and violence and things of that nature, do they understand the core values of the community, don't embarrass the family name, and what's expected of them? Those are questions I'm asking myself today as I talk to young people and about their history. Do you know your history? Do you have a mission? What's the family focus and values? And are you prepared to be better than that last generation? And that's the question, Pastor. What are we not saying? What are we not adding to the ingredients of success? And how do we get back to that?
Chief, one thought I had. So I read an article where during the migration, they described families in the South as being much more connected, and that extended family, where as you and the pastor are talking about. The article talked about as the migration took to Detroit, Chicago, the North, families, both parents had to work. Or one, as you pointed out, one parent would come, work, maybe the kids came too, but that the problem with the migration was young kids were left alone. After school, if both parents is working and there wasn't time, so they hung out and could then join gangs. How much time did you and your troops focus on youth gangs during your tenure?
John, that was a good question. You took me back to something I forgot about. You're right, the extended family from the South would also talk about during that migration that there was someone always at home. You didn't have latchkey kids.
Right.
You had a grandparent, in-law,
Exactly.
or someone there to greet those children when they came home. But as time went on and we went through this whole issue of forced busing and segregation, we saw gangs start to form when you had forced busing. When you took kids out of one neighborhood and they had to survive and transverse to another community, they often formed protective circles, which later on those would call them threat groups or indoor gangs, just to survive. Now the question became that if they in fact were doing it for protection reasons, in other words, transgressing back and forth to the neighborhoods, or was it economically driven? And some would say it switched from that of protection to that being economically driven over time.
Okay.
And we may be some of the remnants of that is what we're seeing right now.
So when did that happen? I've read some articles, and I guess it probably happened differently depending on where you were in the country. That in the, I was reading an article. I didn't know that those gangs that we talk about today in Chicago and some of the other major cities were forming as early as the late 60s and early 70s. And when did, crack and those drugs come into many of these major cities where we started experiencing that? Again, I say in 1975, my brother was killed, and certainly he was out there involved in that lifestyle that ultimately led to his death.
Well, if you look at the history and look in places, big cities like New York and Chicago in particular, you knew that immigrant communities have pretty much operate under the same family values and core values of bringing one over to the country or bringing them into the neighborhoods. But it was still a need to have that core protection, familiarity to survive. I mean, and we saw gangs form in New York and Chicago around those immigrants and those groups who were moving in, the minority groups that were moving in those communities. So the question is, they were able to get away from that in some cases, those immigrant groups, the minority groups. And the question is, why haven't we? And perpetuation of that violence and a gang mentality, is it back to economically based, or is it simply territorial? Is it based on survival? And I think we need to tear that apart because I think it's all three.
Well, I do too. I would agree. It's all three of them. Yes.
So the question becomes, when can we carve out the need for survival and lessen the need for violence to protect our interests and territory and make it more of an opportunity to invest in those same communities in a positive way over the next decade? We've seen the deterioration and the loss of income, of life, And in the reverse migration, 181,000 people have moved from Chicago in the last 10 to 15 years. So we've seen a reverse migration as a result of some of the things we're talking about. But the question of those who remain, can we move that into an economic development piece and a co-op kind of conversation about how we survive as a group as opposed to challenging each other violently?
But if crime in the black community is driven, and you articulated it very well, I think both you, Chief, and John, if there's a survival mentality, and when we talk about the underground economy, is the fact that we're still producing, having 74% of black children born in a single-parent household, typically by younger mothers, is that not contributing to that, where you have multiple children, where there is a struggle to survive? When I was growing up, everybody was poor, so you didn't really know you was poor. But now these kids are seeing that other kids have a lot of the nicer things, and they tend to want them too. And if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, and I'm 15 years old, what might I not do in order to eat and to help put food on the table for my brothers and sisters?
One of the
John, you take that one?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
One of the interesting pieces now that I've read, everybody was anti-Clinton when he reformed welfare, and he put a work ethic in it, and then they expanded government services. From 1993 to 2010, I believe, child poverty has gone down 50%. That work element works, and then the expansion of Medicaid, health care, and food stamps has lowered poverty by 50% of children. That's an interesting piece. Now, I taught school for a while over at the accredited school of Tech High School. And I could tell, I taught about 7 years, and I could tell when students walked in my class whether or not they were going to be successful. Because you can tell who had somebody that was looking out for them, that was guiding them along. We held a town hall when I was working for Goldsmith, Mayor Goldsmith, here to look at how we could improve schools. The mayor didn't have any legal authority over schools, but we understood in the core cities that was a big piece. And throughout every side of this town, every side of this city, educators, teachers jumped on me like white on rice about the fact that how can you expect me to get Johnny ready when he comes to that kindergarten, first grade, he doesn't know his name, he doesn't know his numbers, his colors, his shapes. I can't get Johnny ready in 6 weeks.
But my question, John, and to Chief Hite, how different was that than Johnny going to school in 1940 and 50? Because my grandfather probably went to school to the 3rd or 4th grade. He ended up having to work to help support the family. So were we having those same issues in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, early 70s with black kids being behind, or was it the fact they went to all black schools, most of them?
The difference is what Chief Hite was talking about.
Okay.
In the 40s and 50s and 60s, early 60s, our parents, whether they were educated or not, wanted us to do better.
Okay.
That's what the chief was pointing, and that's a critical element. So they sent you to school with the charge that you were going to do what that teacher said to you. You were going to learn.
Absolutely.
You were going to learn. The change has shifted now to where parents are no longer wise like that. Younger parents have no clue on the success formula to get up and out. They don't have it. So they're not pushing their kids to learn. They're not preparing them, probably because they don't have the skills to teach them to read, to teach them to calculate. So when they get to school, they're blank. And then by the third grade, if you can't calculate or read, it's about over.
Yeah, well, Chief, what percentage of those kids who, what John are talking about, that you end up dealing with over the years in law enforcement that become a part of, the juvenile criminal justice system, and once they get there, what is the success rate of moving those kids from going down the wrong path to getting on the right path? Are we having a difficult time getting kids who may end up in the juvenile justice system to get on the right path in life?
Well, I'm going to use a couple of terms, Pastor, that we used to talk about way back in when, that in education, the term social promotion became popular around the country. It got to the point where kids who were marginalized in terms of education weren't given special education, not education, but tutors or others trainers to prepare them. They would just promote them on. And the other problem was understanding the engagement of the young person who had challenges, whether it was mental health or otherwise in the home. There was no opportunity for them to have the intervention. So I saw both. I saw parents who were trying in some cases, and big children with IEPs and things of that nature. And then I saw ones who really were really kind of resistant and given the opportunity to emancipate themselves at age 16. They no longer had to school. So the criminal justice system was always
Chief Hite, we're having a hard time hearing you. Are you?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you a little better. Yeah. It was a little muffled.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. What I was saying was that we have emancipation with young people at age 16 now, whether we didn't see that in the early 30s, 40s, and 50s, 60s, 70s. We now children are able to drop out of school. And, criminal justice system is waiting for them if they do that. And the fact that some of our children are more sophisticated than their parents in terms of education. So, because a lot of times the parents had them when they were teenagers, and they never completed their education. So it's been a cycle there for years past. As we talk about educating our children and preparing them, we also have to do a dual presentation to the parents. Because when we go to court, you'd be surprised what you hear, because the children and the parents sound the same.
Excellent point.
Yeah, that is one of the questions I want to continue in that path, Chief. Some have argued that the prison system has only taught people who end up going through it to be better or more sophisticated criminals, that it doesn't really rehabilitate them, so that it's been really ineffective. I know those will argue that the penalties are not harsh enough for those who are repeat violent offenders, within communities of color. What is the balance there? Because there's still that argument that's being made that enough is not being done, or the penalties are not stiff enough for individuals who are probably the most dangerous in our society.
Well, I would say this, Pastor. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I would say this, that I think there's a misnomer that think the criminal justice system is the end all to family court or family issues. I think I've always been an advocate for a community court, so we can begin to triage and assess the individual and the family to make a determination which the best interest of all. I don't think necessary punishment is necessary in every case. I think corrective measures is. I think the umbrella is the corrective measures, and discipline and punishment falls under that. The corrective behavior, but understanding behavior, first of all.
Chief, we're having problems again with hearing you. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna try this again.
Okay.
The assessment has to be under the umbrella of corrective measures to be able to identify challenges in the family and with the individuals in the family, so you can begin to mete out the type of corrective measures that's necessary, whether it be education or it becomes some type of pittance that has to be paid in the community. Mm-hmm. The problem with our criminal justice system is the crimes are committed outside of the courts, outside the neighborhood, in the neighborhoods, but the community never hears the corrective measure given to that individual in the neighborhood. So they believe that the justice system doesn't work. Community court will require you to meet that individual in the community and mete out the challenges and the changes that need to take place in the neighborhoods. That's what's missing from our system.
Wow. I've never thought of it in those terms, and something that we really need to be looking at. What John, you and Chief Hite, what has been the role, and I was really struck by this because I never really paid attention. I was watching a lot of the Superfly movies and all of that when I was back in the 70s, but the role that media, TV, and today certainly music and videos are playing when it comes to the crime and violence that we're seeing. Has there been much change from the 70s to now in 2022 when it comes to movies, video games, music videos, and music itself that is impacting the thinking of young people that's leading to more violence?
I think the media is on steroids now.
It's on steroids now.
In that thug life is okay. Thug life is a good life. I mean, it's like it's an option. I mean, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. And young people now, if you talk about, do you want to move into the corporate world or get a job and get married, buy a home? For too many young people, that's not what they want to do. It's become so attractive now to lead that, whatever that thug life means, that to me it's detrimental for young people, but because the choices are life ending. The underground economy works, but it only works for a few, and so you've got a huge amount of young people who are just working retail underground criminal activity for $7.50, $10 an hour if you measure it out, to end up killed because somebody wants their drugs or you stealing my car. I just think that the media glorifies now and makes thug life a way of living.
Chief, does the media play a role in what we're seeing in the violence in communities of color? Has the thug life or the glorification of the gangster life, is media contributing to that, or do you see it differently?
Well, I think the deputy mayor hit the nail on the head. He's right. If we go back to the 70s and the Superfly movement and what they would call the black exploitation films, there was always exposure of the bling, high living, high cars, the furs back in those days, the big action cars. And the idea of instant gratification today is perpetuated through social media. Now, unfortunately, we don't have filters on it. We had in our upbringing, we had filters of what we had in the news media, and there was a certain amount of moral concern as to the messaging at the end. It was always a message of some type of betterment and civility. Well, the civility has been missing from a lot of the messages, especially in social media, for a long time. And I remember having a conversation after watching a movie and being excited about it, and someone would bring you back to earth, say, that's not how it is in real life. Well, in social media, we have life imitating art and art imitating life. So the question becomes is the instant gratification piece. How do we challenge that to make sure understand that there's the work ethic to get to that point where you can have the cars, have the houses, but you got to put in the work. You have to get educated first of all. You have to look and understand economics, and you can't have it all in one day. It takes time, and that's the message that I think is lost.
One of the things that's not on this list that I would probably include on this list was probably the loss of the very moral fabric of the black community, where it seemed to be, even though we were experiencing some level of violence, it tended to be really concentrated, in my opinion, in the 70s, to those who were a part of the game, who were out there in the streets. You know, we were not having a lot of innocent people being killed, or you get in an argument and it, you know, it led to drama where, several people were killed. My question is, as I talk about this, what happened that we lost kind of a moral compass as a community and the role that the church once played? I don't see that as it's something that is missing today. I would say that these kids will do things that Chief, we never, and John, we never thought about doing, but they will do it today. Yeah. So what happened? What happened from the 60s to 2022 where we have lost that as a community, it seems like, where too many of our young people have no regard for the sanctity of human life?
I can tell you this much. What I remember is that during the time of segregation and forced busing, that those who got quality education, whoever get through affirmative action or whatever other means they were able to go to college or leave the neighborhood, the question was whether or not you came back to, or whether or not when you left the community and went and got education, did you continue to identify with the community you come from? And I remember the term that we all remember, it was a cop-out when you didn't come back out to the community and serve in the community or come back to the community, or you gave an excuse why you didn't come back to the community. So you were copping out. Remember that,
right.
That term? And so the question is, looking at that generationally, have we consistently gone back to the community we come from when we've been fortunate and blessed to be able to matriculate through the educational system, learn the economic process? Do we go back and give back to the communities which we come from?
I don't think so. I think when you make it, you tend to move out of the community,
right?
And that's where you had, kind of the large number of black middle class moving to suburban areas.
Well, I
so
think
therefore, if you imagine it doing it through 2 or 3 generations, and what impact will it have on that same community?
I think that both you and the chief are talking about what needs to happen. I've talked to circle of friends, in my 50 years of working, and there were those who did come back, but they get their car stolen, and so
so it ended it, huh? Yeah.
It's much easier to come to King Ribs and Barbecue Heaven and get a slab of ribs and go back home that I've contributed to my neighborhood.
You contributed. Yeah. Well
said.
I guess the final question, in this segment is, I think Ebony made the point that if we don't have a real conversation as Black America, will this continue to go on, and will it continue to get worse? Can we have a real conversation about these root causes or causes of the violence and begin to come up with real solutions to addressing it? Or will we continue to be silent about this issue and not have these conversations that are needed to try to address this problem?
Well, I have to circle back to the idea, Pastor, of the community court. We have to have a means of having a discussion in an environment where it's safe and people can vent and vet their feelings and not feel challenged by it, and with a desired outcome at the end. Because I think you're right. There's so much hurt that's gone on for years. Hurt people, and there's so much disdain for people who left the community, who abandoned the family, left them in a lurch. When they get institutionalized and they come back, there's no place for them to go and get reconnected. So the question is, where do we go to triage all that we talked about today in a setting where it comes with real outcomes and not just invested in the problem, but find real solutions? I think a community court or a concept of that nature gives us opportunity to vet all these things.
I really like his community court piece. And, but when you look, the items you listed when you started this program, racism, drugs, unemployment, prison system reform, double standard. We didn't ask the chief about double standard. The media, those are still here.
Right.
40 years ago, it was a crisis.
Right.
Nobody wanted to talk about it.
Right.
Today, it's a crisis.
Right.
And we still don't have everybody wanting to sit down and look internally at what things we can do. It's not all internal problems
Right.
in the black community. But if you don't address the internal problems, you're never going to solve it. So do I think we'll get the chief back in 10 years to be talking about this with you? Yeah, I do. Because I still think we're in denial about, one, the crime element. But two, I think there's fear because we don't talk about it. We don't tell, the chief. I remember the chief coming to me looking to get a voucher to get someone relocated, because of the fear of that criminal element.
Right.
If I testify, I'm in trouble.
Right.
So I don't see those issues going away.
Right.
So I think in 10 years, we'll be back looking for community courts and a way to solve these problems.
Well, thank you, John and Chief Hite, for joining me today on Real Talk. For those of you who are listening, this is kind of part one of this conversation. We're going to deal with part two, what has been the consequences of, urban crime and violence, or for some, black-on-black crime and violence. And then the third part, we're going to focus on what are the solutions? What are the real solutions, and having a real dialogue and conversation about that. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and this has been Real Talk. Join me next time as I bring more real talk about the real issues that affect our communities here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter. This is Reverend Charles Harrison, and I pray that you have a blessed and wonderful day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.